היי, ערב טוב לכולם. סליחה שאני לא יכולה להיות איתכם פיזית, אבל אני פה מרחוק עוקבת אחרי המיטאפ המדהים הזה, שכמו שאתם יודעים היה אמור להיות מושק באוקטובר שנה שעברה, אבל כמובן מהסיבות המובנות נדחה. הרבה דברים קרו במדינה, אבל דווקא כל הנסיבות הם אלה שחיזקו את התחושה שלנו שאנחנו חייבות להוציא את הפעילות בתחום בריאות הנפש לאור. אז אנחנו מאוד מתרגשות לחזור ולקיים את המיטאפ הזה ובסדרה של פעילויות בנושא בריאות הנפש. כמו כולנו, גם אנחנו מבינות שרפואה כללית, קונבנציונלית ובריאות הנפש קשורים אחד בשני. הסיבה שתחום בריאות הנפש הוא תחום בפני עצמו נעוץ במגוון אתגרים ייחודיים לתחום, ואתם גם תשמעו היום מהדוברים אם זה אופן נתונים, סובייקטיביות ההתרשמות, או אפילו מוסכמות חברתיות שאופפות את התחום. לא תמיד מנגישים את הנושא לקהל הרחב, ולכן אני חושבת שיהיה מאוד מעניין לשמוע היום איך אלגוריתמים מסייעים במגוון האתגרים האלה. במיטאפ היום אנחנו נתמקד בניתוח טקסט לבניית תובנות במגוון הבחנות, ואתם תשמעו על מספר use cases מרתקים, ואנחנו גם בסוף נקיים פאנל בנוכחות קלינאים שידונו על איך הם משתמשים בכלים האלה, אז אני מאוד מאוד ממליצה לכם להישאר לפאנל. אם רק אפשר להעביר לסלייד הבא, אנחנו גם רוצות להזכיר לכם שאתם יכולים, אם אתם לא עוקבים אחרי המדיות של הקהילה, אז אתם יכולים להצטרף למגוון מדיות, פייסבוק, לינקדאין, עמוד מיטאפ, יומן הקהילה וקבוצת וואטסאפ שכרגע הקבוצה השקטה יש בה עדיין מקום. ועוד דבר אחד קטן לפני שאנחנו נתחיל, זה שאנחנו רוצות להמשיך ולקיים עוד פעילויות בנושא, ואנחנו מחפשות ספונסר גם לכיבוד, גם מקום מארח. יש לנו עוד רשימת תכנים בקנה, אנחנו רק מחפשים, אז אם אתם עוסקים בכל מיני נושאים שקשורים לבריאות הנפש, אבל לא רק, תפנו אלינו בבקשה, אנחנו מאוד נשמח. כמו שאתם רואים, ספונסרים גם זוכים לחשיפה רחבה בקהילה שלנו, וכמובן אם יש לכם נושא להרצאה אז אתם גם מאוד מוזמנים לפנות אלינו. אני גם רוצה ממש להגיד תודה רבה לאליוס הלס בהזדמנות הזאת על האירוח ועל שיתוף הפעולה, במיוחד לעמיד, שתכף אתם גם תשמעו אותו בהרחבה. זאת הייתה יוזמה ושותפות נהדרת לארגן איתך את האירוע הזה. וזהו, ואנחנו מקוות שתהנו באירוע הזה ובאירועים הבאים. תודה רבה.
אז מילה, הסיבה שהיא לא פה זה שהיא לא בארץ, אחרת תהיו בטוחים שהייתה מגיעה, אז אולי אני רוצה רגע גם לקחת שנייה להגיד לה תודה על הארגון המטורף של האירוע הזה מרחוק. ואני אציג את טליה, אני מדברת את הקהילה, אני אציג את הדובר הראשון שלנו, גם המארח שלנו. הרצאות יהיו באנגלית וגם הפאנל, אז חבל שכולם בסדר עם זה. אז עמית, ספינרד, a data scientist from Helios. Amit comes from a background of neurobiology research and bioinformatics. In the last 7 years, he worked in the industry, data science, and several medical
So I'll move now to English. If you have questions and you're not comfortable in English, you can speak in Hebrew. I will try to answer in Hebrew as well. Okay. Okay, guys, so I'm happy to give you the introduction for this evening, generally connecting NLP to mental health. That's it, let's go. First of all, about myself, although Tanya presented me nicely, I'm Amit, I'm a data scientist here in MeDS Health. I design a lot of the services and the products and the features we have in the data science. The agenda for today, I want to give you an introduction about MeDS, the place you're in, and the idea of care operations, which I'll explain in a second. What is psychotherapy, the specifics of mental health in data, and the specific challenges of mental health AI adoption. I have an echo. It was a Zoom. Okay. And some examples on what to consider when we build the data solutions. So let's start with Ilios, and of course I didn't start it here. Okay, let's start with Ilios. Ilios was founded 4 years ago by these 3 founders. We sort of introduced the idea of care operations, which the idea behind it, yes, thank you. The idea behind it is to let therapists deal only with therapy. All the burden around therapy, we take on ourselves. You deal with the things you're best at and the things you like the most, which is therapy. And by the way, we also help you with the therapy itself, but I will talk about it more in a second. So what happens in psychotherapy sessions? Generally, some of you know less and some of you know more. What happens when you go into a therapy session? So first of all, the therapist usually does the initial assessment of you, what you need, what are your problems, what do you want to get to. Then they usually do treatment planning, and then they apply within the sessions themselves. They apply in the session themselves listening skills and intervention. Listening skills are more passive way that therapists use in order to help the patient, and interventions are active strategies they do in order to help the patient. And we can think of all the NLP solutions we can apply on each of these stages. And by the way, all of these needs to be documented really, really well, which is also another burden. We can think about applying AI and NLP solutions to all of them. That's what we do here in MeDS. And by the way, when I talk about this stuff, I talk about the macro level. This is what happens between one session between one therapist and one patient. We can also think about the macro level. What do clinic managers, which have, for example, 100 therapists under them, what do they want to get using NLP? So maybe better outcomes monitoring that they currently don't have. Leadership reporting and compliance, whether, for example, the documentation is aligned with clinical guidelines. Okay, so I talked about what we can develop with AI and NLP for day-to-day practice, but we can even think larger than that, right? Our data here is super, super unique. We have data from real-life sessions, and that's something that in the psychological field doesn't exist in the quantities that we talk about. And that's why we can answer very real questions regarding mental health. For example, let's think about phobias, right? Just as an example, and the idea of טיפול בחשיפה. This is an exposure therapy. Thank you. We can think, for example, of the very interesting question: is systematic exposure, let's say, actually working? And usually before that, in order to answer the question, you would have to, conduct an RCT, maybe do like university academic study. But we have real life data, like real sessions that really happening. So, and lots of them. And when I say lots, I mean a lot of them. And that's why we can answer much more bigger quantitative clinical research. And in the next talks, they will talk about it more. Another cool aspect of mental health that we need to remember, not like other medical fields or a lot of other medical fields where NLP can help in reducing the burden or the surroundings of the treatment. NLP here, think that the text is actually the treatment. Talk therapy is the therapy itself. So in a sense, we can not only just help with the burden, we can actually modify or enhance the remedy. We can tell, it's like improving the medication itself. So this is something, a really cool aspect to remember about mental health. Some numbers of what we achieve with the things we're developing here, and we'll talk about it more. So we obviously reduce time in documentation and doing a lot of automation about the generating of documentation. But we also get like clinical stuff, higher client engagement because the therapists can be much more focused on the therapy itself. We get better symptom reduction because of different stuff that we develop, and we will talk about it. And we get, for example, much more evidence-based intervention. So maybe when therapists have a better visibility to what they did during the session using our NLP solutions, they can apply much more evidence-based techniques. What's so special about mental health? A lot of you come from medical fields and data science and medical fields. Can you guess? What's special about mental health data?
The outcomes are way harder to diagnose correctly and consistently.
That's an issue.
Can you repeat their answer?
Yeah, so the answer was the outcomes monitoring is much more harder. Defining outcome monitoring is really, really hard.
Not a precise science.
Again, it's a qualitative science. You mean like mostly today? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say as well that it's very subjective.
Yeah, right. It's kind of relates all of your responses. So let's go over it. So in mental health, we have much more longer and detailed sessions.
Another difference is you don't have established protocols, guidelines, like you have normal medicine.
Yeah,
Maybe the approach is or dynamic.
right. You kind of do, but sometimes they are not. There are sort of like a continuous research rather than evidence-based guidelines. So this is the issue. We have very long and detailed sessions. Sensitive details, it's in all medical fields, but in mental health, it's even bigger. Because think that in mental health, many times the patient doesn't talk not only about themselves, they talk about other people. And they mention their names and their medical stuff. It becomes like a larger scale, more sensitive. A lot of implicity, sometimes, deciphering whether a patient is better or not is really tough. And we have to consider much more body language and tone. It's ongoing and continuous, not like many other medical fields, which is 1 session, 2 session, 3 session. Here it can be months long of treatment. And we have much, because of the sensitive detail stuff, people not only talking about themselves, we have much more frequent entities confusion. Again, so we can have, because of this confusion, we can have sometimes summaries that confuse between the entities. Why is AI adoption more challenging in mental health? This is relating to the point I talked before, in which in mental health, the conversation is the treatment. Meaning that therapists are much less likely to adopt these kind of solutions because they are not only afraid their data will be leaked, they are afraid it will hurt the treatment itself. Like trust is really important in order to do it. So this is a very large obstacle. Technically, how does this happen? Okay, so I talked about a lot of solutions we can apply to even to day. Let's focus on one of them and go quickly. Documentation. So documentation in mental health usually consists of several fields they have to complete after a session was done in order to, see in a larger scale what happened during the session. So they have usually a data section in which they describe what actually happened, assessment, which is more clinical assessment. The patient looks depressed, more tired, sleeping problems, and plan. What do they, considering the assessment and the data, what they plan to do on next to help the patient. But of course, it has to be much more complicated. It's not the only type of clinical note. There are tons of them, and here I gave only the most common ones. Actually, each clinic can develop their own kind of note and what kind of information they feel in their documentation, which makes it more complicated problem. Okay, so how do we step in and help in documentation? So we can think about two solutions to go about that. We can think about putting a recorder, right? And do it all passively. Like listen to what happened and then just give them the documentation. They don't need to press anything. The recorder is there, does anything for them. And they can actually maybe more aligned to what a lot of therapists do, that they write notes during the session. We can take their notes and help them, usually it's like bullets. They don't actually write in details what's happened. And we can take these, sketches and make them like a clinically written note. Okay, so we have these two pipelines that we can use in order to apply NLP on documentation. Let's go over quickly on these pipelines. So again, this is a very large scale. So obviously the first part of the pipeline is we have recording. We need to make it a transcription in order to make it a text. We need then, after we have the transcription, we just have, a bunch of text. We need to divide it into speakers, speaker 1, speaker 2, speaker 3, if it's a more than 2 people therapy session. Then we need to identify what, speaker 1, is it the client or is it the therapist? And then we need to do a lot of classification. Think about a 45 minutes therapy session. A lot of stuff is what we call it's kind of garbage. It's not interesting to the summary or to the mental health. So we need to classify a lot, like what parts are more important, what parts were applied intervention. A lot of classifications needed to be done here. And in the end, we need to summarize. Okay, this is basically it. Of course, it has a lot of variations. And the non-recording based pipeline is a bit simpler, right? Maybe we take their sketches of what they wrote, we classify them because each sketch is related maybe to a different field. And then we do like the other way around, and summarization is like paragraphization, make it larger and more clinically written. In the end, how does the UI look with these pipelines? So for recording live, they actually just get in the end suggestions of what happened. You can see here the note itself, and they get the suggestions that we give them in the end of this pipeline. For non-recording based pipeline, they need to do some active stuff, right? Write bullet points here. And then when they click generate note, it takes the bullet points and makes it paragraphs for a clinical note. So good, and I have time. And we can think about which type of solutions and models we apply for each stage. So we can think a lot about, I will give here a lot of options. For recording, we can use, to have a better recording and to identify voice better. So we can have recorders, some of them are smarter. We get maybe sometimes even AI-based recorders. Or we can use much more simpler solutions like Teams, Zoom, all these kind of recorders, and use Python, usually Python packages in order to reduce noise, identify speakers, identify voice order, and so on. When we get to transcription, we can use models which are out there, or we can use, a lot of known and out there solutions that we can directly use. And then we have, let's say we have transcription, a lot of text. Then in the speaker recognition and speaker identification becomes maybe a bit of more complicated problem. We need to do a lot of clustering to cluster voices and match them to a specific text within the transcription. And we can use maybe sometimes when we have speaker 1, speaker 2, we can use maybe simpler classification models in order to understand which is the therapist and which is not. In that sense, it's nice to note that we have more and more dedicated models for ASR that kind of combine many of these stages together. So we don't need to separate between transcription, speaker recognition, and identification. We can just put it all up together, and it gives us a full-on transcription in the end with separated by speakers. And in classification part, it depends really much on the test complexity, but we can use simple classifiers or small language models. It doesn't have to be very large language models. Sometimes it can be really, really small ones. Or we can use, and for the summarization and paragraphization, we can use smaller language models or large language models, again, depending on the test complexity, or, out there LLMs. And also here we have solutions that kind of combine the two. For example, what? Wait. Yeah, it started jumping. Okay. And we can combine the two. Maybe classification and summarization can be done by the same language model at once. It doesn't need to be separated. Okay. So I will finish here. I just will say that a lot of modeling consideration take part when we analyze these pipelines and we create them. Obviously, like all of you, latency, task complexity, time to develop, and cost. This depends, this makes us make the decision whether we go with the smaller language models, maybe we go with BERT, maybe we go with ChatGPT, maybe we go with Amazon Transcribe. It really, really depends on what we want to develop here. And oftentimes we don't need, OpenAI or very large language models. Maybe sometimes even rule-based stuff are like the best solutions for simpler tests. So key takeaways I want you to take from this. NLP application enhances treatment and benefits the psychotherapy field, both in day-to-day products and overall we can do much larger clinical research. And we have very field-specific layers of data sensitivity, as I told you about, the entities confusion, the other stuff we talked about when we talked about the specifics. Technology adoption is a bit harder. And again, like a lot of medical fields and data science, we take into consideration innovation versus simplicity whenever we develop a data or a model solution. And that's it. That's the introduction for today. Now, I will present speakers that will speak maybe more in details and more, about their actual models that they developed. But that's, I hope you enjoyed, and if you have questions, you don't? Okay, great. So I want to present the next speaker, which is Ilan Kahan. Can I present him? Yeah, sure. Ilan is a data scientist here in MeDS. He became more sophisticated as I saw as time goes by, and now develops a lot of the solutions we have here. Comes from a background of data analysis before, and that's it. Go ahead, thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
Speak a bit closer to the mic so they hear you better on Zoom.
Okay.
To this one.
Yeah, that's the okay.
Do you guys hear me from the microphone? Maybe it's better for the microphone for Zoom also.
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm Ilan. I'm gonna talk about interventions and the process of building a model for classifying. Let me know if it's better. The process of building a model to classify interventions in a therapy session. So yeah, my name is Ilan. I'm a data scientist here in Ilios. This is my cool avatar, Trubit. And I come from a slightly different background. Okay. Okay, this is me. I come from a slightly different background. I was everybody's favorite profession. I used to be a consultant. But then I saw the light, moved to Israel, and became a data scientist. And yeah, there you go. I'm going to talk about what are interventions. Amit touched on it briefly, but I'm going to go a bit more deep, not too much. Then I'm going to go into some challenges that of training a model for interventions and using our data. and how it looks in the end for the user. Also, Amit touched upon it, but I'm gonna highlight interventions there. Okay, so as Amit said, these are the main components of a therapy session, right? Interventions is right there. But what exactly are interventions? They are actions that facilitate the improvement of the patient's psychological, social, or emotional well-being. And what are the actions that a therapist can do during a therapy session? It's mostly speech. So here in our context, interventions means more specifically ways of phrasing and ways of speaking that will help and it will guide the patient towards improvement. I also want to touch on what interventions mean in EBT. So EBT is evidence-based therapy. And I want to talk about it because we serve clients in the US. And in the US, EBT is the most, or is a very popular modality of therapy. So we focus on that a lot. Okay, in EBT, interventions are tested and structured techniques that help the patient, help the therapist improve the patient's well-being. So that's the main difference, is the testing and structure between like just interventions in a whole and interventions in EBT. I want to give you guys a few examples to make things more clear. So first of all, positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement encourages behavior change in the patient. For example, if the patient comes to the therapist and says, I started going to the gym recently, twice a week, then the therapist can respond by saying, that's great, that's amazing, you should keep it up, it's gonna be great for your long-term health. That's positive reinforcement. While cognitive restructuring is used to help people identify and change negative and unhealthy thinking patterns. Also, I'll give you an example to make things more clear. If I am the patient and I tell my therapist that Amit sent me a message last night and he still didn't respond to me, therefore he hates me, then the therapist can answer by saying, what is your evidence for taking that conclusion? Like maybe you're taking it too far, maybe he didn't have time, you're seeing things black and white, he loves me, he hates me, and maybe things aren't that simple. And that will help you think about the situation in a different manner. Okay. Now, interventions are a very important part of the treatment. So the therapists need to include them in the notes. This is the depth note that Amit showed earlier, and I highlighted here where the interventions are. We have here the therapist validated their feelings and used cognitive restructuring to etc. So here we are talking about two interventions, validation and cognitive restructuring. So if the therapists need to put it in their notes and to evidence that they did interventions during the sessions, we want to help them with that. For that, we want to identify interventions that were used during the session. The problem is interventions is very domain specific, and our data is also very specific. As Amit said, it's not only specific, it's very unique. You won't find a database like that online. So unfortunately, exactly. That was your reaction. Yeah, that's part of the presentation. So unfortunately, we can't go into Hugging Face and find an interventions identifier for transcripts of therapy sessions. So we need to do our own. And I'm gonna go over the model training process and highlight some of the challenges that are involved. Maybe some of them are specific for interventions, some of them are like for all of our models. So starting with data preparation, as Amit said, we have transcriptions of therapy sessions. So the transcriptions themselves might be wrong. And also the speaker identified, sorry?
Diarization.
Yeah, diarization, that's also a problem. I didn't put it there because it's a fancy word, but yeah, diarization might be wrong. The separation and recognition of speakers might be wrong. So that means maybe the therapist said something that's considered an intervention, but that is identified as the client. So we can't use it in the end because it's like client speech. So that adds complexity to identifying interventions in a session. But who says what is an intervention or not? That's our amazing clinical analysts. Some of them are here. They are psychologists that work with us and they tag our data. So they go through the transcriptions and say here, the therapist used validation, here it used positive reinforcement and so on. And the thing is, two experts in the field can disagree on whether or not an intervention was used in a certain moment. So that adds yet another layer of complexity, not only for preparation, but also for the validation of the model later on. And finally, it's not a unique problem, but sometimes we have very little data to train our models. Okay, that's not the preparation. I'm going to go through a little bit of the data we use to train this specific model. So our analysts went through over 500 sessions, tagging interventions, and around 80,000, let's say, sentences were not interventions, and 5,000 were interventions. So it's a highly unbalanced data set. Some of the most represented interventions in that the most samples are validation. We have positive reinforcement and cognitive restructuring that I mentioned before, which is great. This is enough data to train a classifier, but that's not always the case. So here we see the least represented interventions. We have emotion wheel with one sample and progressive muscle relaxation with 4. And I'll give a spoiler, they didn't go to production. Another interesting thing we can look on is the timestamps of the usage of the interventions. So we have here positive reinforcement and the timestamp of the session here. And there's kind of a hump in the beginning of the session. And here we have coping skills. If you squint, maybe it's like a normal distribution. And my not professional interpretation of that is that maybe in the beginning of the session, the patient talks about the nice things that happened to them in the last few weeks or days. And as the session goes on, starts talking about things that the patient needs coping with. So the therapist will apply some coping skills interventions. But that's just my opinion. Okay. Now going through to the data science research itself. I also forgot the time marking. Yes. Okay. So some of the things that we needed to take into consideration for this specific model. Do we classify sentences? Because like basically we're tagging sentences, right? But the dialogue, the context is important. So do we classify whole sections of dialogue or do we classify only sentences? And if we classify a dialogue, how much of the dialogue do we give as input? Like should like therapist, patient, or just therapist, patient? Do we even take the patient into consideration into this classification because it's the therapist's speech that we want to classify? Do we train with a subset of interventions because we have so much difference in how much we have of each intervention? And do we even take the timestamps into consideration? Maybe what I said about problem positive reinforcement and coping skills makes no sense and it's just gonna mess things up. So maybe this is what you're expecting right now. I just gave the data to ChatGPT and call it a day. But sometimes we need to get our hands dirty and actually do this.
Tipo, de cima tá normal e de baixo comentado vai. Aí eu troco.
That's my brother.
Comentado, vai.
Joe, desliga o microfone, por favor. And okay, this is a few things that I tried for this specific model. So we're talking about, a lot of them are structured, right? I talked about TPT, a lot of them are structured. So maybe TF-IDF will give us good results. So I tried TF-IDF with a grid search of different classifiers and parameters. Also a pipeline of encoding the sentences with sentence encoder, doing dimensionality reduction or not, and then classifiers, and training BART classification. As Amit said, smaller models sometimes give us good results. So we tried the BART classifier, and then we can adjust the threshold per label to give us the intended precision and recall that we want. And some techniques. Yeah. So we have unbalanced data sets, so maybe downsampling the not interventions is a good idea. We can train only for a few interventions and not the, we have 20 labels here. So maybe we can try like 5 and then 5, or the ones with the most data. Another thing I tried was to manually alter the weights in the loss function to give more weight to the less represented interventions, for example. And a binary classifier of, is this an intervention or is this not an intervention? And very well. The ones in green are the ones that are like somewhat in production in some capacity, and the ones in red weren't good enough, but I tried. This is a nice graph that I like. You can see here the precision and the recall, and the area is like total predictions and correct predictions, and on the x-axis we have the threshold. And it's just showing like here we can define like what are we prioritizing, precision or recall, and we can define a threshold in the BART classifier that give us the result we want. And then that's more of a product thing, I guess, but we also need to take into consideration, of course. Finally, for moving to production, I couldn't think of anything super unique, but we have data security because our models have a lot of PHI, personal data, but it's not exclusive to us. I guess everyone here has to do with data security. And finally, this is what matters, right? How it looks, the UI, how the user sees it and uses it. So this is what Amit was showing back in his presentation. When the therapist is writing his data part of the notes, we will have the interventions here on the side, and then he can decide whether he uses or not our suggestion. That not only helps with documentation, but also as like a guide of what the therapist did during the session. Maybe he forgot he did something and we'll have it here. Maybe he didn't know, maybe he just wants confirmation of of if he's applying the intervention or not. And we can also check this timeline here of the session with some techniques that he used during the session. And to finalize, I picked randomly some feedback from our users. So coincidentally, they're all 5 out of 5. They all say how great the interventions are. Yeah, that's it. Any questions?
When working with other models such as BART, how do you handle you have only a small window?
Context?
Yes.
Yes. I think for this one, I use like just one like context window, say before and after, and it had results, like good enough results. That's.
Is there a tendency between the labels? For example,
Yeah.
one message.
I checked the confusion matrix and I thought of putting it here, but I found one instance of like, we had two labels, identifying cognitive distortions and cognitive restructuring, which by the name kind of seem related, and they were very related. In the end, we combined them, each one class. So sometimes.
I mean, if it's during time and the temporal aspect, if the first message say one impression, does it modify the probability impression and then following message?
That's interesting. I don't know. Looking longer term at the effects of interventions on the outcomes. Yes, I looked at it once, but in that analysis, we don't find much, but I can't say for sure.
But we did find maybe correlation of interventions with specific behaviors, other behaviors in the session, but not specifically on outcome. Wasn't so good.
What do you do with the privacy of the information? I mean, the patients, do they know that it goes anywhere and it's been used for analysis?
Yeah, so that's more of a contract thing, but we have, let's say we have two main products, Scribe and Replay. The Replay is the one that you can replay the session. So we need consent from both the therapist and the patients. But then Scribe, after we finish analyzing the session, it deletes the data. So there's no storage of the session. We don't need the consent in the case.
You need to recognize the emotions in the session.
Sorry, can you repeat?
The emotions during the session. Something that's important.
We don't, I don't think we have any models to detect emotions right now. So, but if it's important or not, I can.
Thank you. Now I will present the next speaker, Lidor Bachar, a team lead here in MeDS in the data team. We have actually a really large data team, so when I say team lead, I really mean it. each even sub-team is huge. Comes from the background of data science in many medical fields. Thank you. So I'm going to talk today about how we empower psychological research area.
היי, תדליק לי את האור.
Okay. So as I mentioned, my name is Lidor, I'm a data scientist, team lead. I have a background in NLP, audio processing, time series analysis. Mainly worked in a medical startup. The background of biomedical engineering. That's interesting. I'm in Daniels for 2 years already. And so today I'm going to talk with you about clinical research at Daniels, high level. And then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper with single paper that we did here about climate anxiety. So we'll talk about what is climate anxiety, why it's interesting for us, about the data, the solution that we did the data science part, of course the results and such. Okay, so let's start with the clinical research at Helios. The research is being led by Dr. Shiri Sadeh-Sharvit, which is our chief clinical officer. We have a lot of research type. Roughly speaking, we have around 4 types of research or papers. First one is randomized clinical trials, RCTs, which I guess everyone are familiar with. Basically,
we saw that while, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but if you let the therapist focus on the therapy and reduce the burden of documentation and all the rest, the clinical outcomes are also better. Okay? So we actually see it and it's really nice. The second thing is the impact of therapy techniques on clinical outcomes. There was a question here before regarding this. There is a paper that we showed that when clinicians use a specific technique that they should do at the end of each session, there were better outcomes for the clients. Okay, so this is something that we actually saw significantly. It was significant. Okay. And third one is AI integration in therapy practice. So this is basically what we do best here at Helios, how to integrate AI in therapy, and we also publish papers on this. And the last one is the one that I'm also going to talk about is real life session analysis, therapy analysis. So we have a lot of data, you already understand, and it's a unique data. And we can analyze real life sessions over the US and get insights out of them. So we can ask questions about this data. So let's start with the paper. And first of all, let's discuss about climate anxiety. What is it? Why it's an interest for us? And first, let's start by definition. So climate anxiety is defined as the anxiety stemming from the global climate crisis and the looming threat of environmental disaster. Basically, what it means that I guess all of us in some way are a little bit anxious about climate, global warming and climate crisis, but some people have more anxiety compared to others, and this is where I come to the therapy session. And there are many researchers that found linkage between climate crisis and mental health consequences. It's something that we see in many papers, and notable organization in the field of psychology has established task forces aimed to raise the awareness of climate anxiety and educate the professional about it. So there is a lot of hype, I would say, in recent years around this topic, a lot of conferences that discuss this one, but explicit discussion in psychotherapy remains largely unexplored. Okay, so no one really knows how common, yeah, thanks, is it. So we have a lack of empirical data, and most studies are qualitative by nature. It's like few sessions or few patients that discuss about it, and we wanted to close this gap. So how did we do it? With our data, obviously, we analyzed over 32,000 sessions, average around 55 minutes. These sessions resulted in 1.7 million micro-dialogues. Micro-dialogues is few ping-pongs between the therapist and the patient. Okay, so as Ilan showed earlier, this is what we define as micro-dialogues. This session were held over 12 US states in 4 US regions, around 850 different therapists and almost 8,000 different clients. And the data was over 30 months. Okay, so what we do with this data? First of all, we took all of the transcription. Again, I remind you, those are very long transcription, around 55 minutes. We segmented them to micro dialogues, basically something that looks similar to this one. Then we did a simple word search with regex to identify or narrow down this list. Okay, so we had 1.7 million micro dialogues. We wanted to narrow down them. We identified around 500 words relative to weather or climate. We started with a smaller list, and we increased this list with word to weather. And something interesting that we saw during this research is actually we use a lot of climate-related words when we talk about our emotions, or when therapists want to convey a message to patients. So there are like three nice examples. I felt flooded with anger, or something that the therapist would say to the client. Each time a thought pops into your head, imagine placing it on one of this cloud and allowing it to float on by. My heart racing like a thunderstorm can sentence. So there are a lot of these climate words. And obviously, the word search is not enough. So for this paper, we fine-tune a classifier. This classifier was based on a BART model that was originally fine-tuned to summarize conversation. The idea is that the model already knows how to understand conversation. And what we did, we added a classification head on top of the BART model. I guess some of you are already well with this technique. We frozen the model parameters, the original one, and we trained only the classification head. This gives pretty good results. We actually managed to succeed to identify micro-dialogues that relates to climate or weather or neither or both in a high precision. And finally, we did a temporal analysis over these micro-dialogues. We analyzed the sessions over time and across US regions. We did actually more analysis. We also did topic detection for these micro-dialogues. I will not go into details on how we did it here because I don't have time, but we also looked at clinical outcomes. We'll find some interesting stuff. I will talk about it later. Okay, so those are the key results, I would say. As you can see here, the percentage of micro-dialogues over time and across US regions, okay, the dotted line here are different region, and the black line is an average of the time US, is really, really sparse. And you can see that the percentage is around 0.5% of micro-dialogues, which is really low. And an interesting thing we saw here is that here, like 2022 Q1, you see this peak. So we went out and looked actually what happened at this time, and we found out that there was a big storm in the US, something really significant, and it was a really nice validation to our pipeline to see that it actually worked. And another thing that I didn't mention earlier, but one of our hypotheses was that over time, because this subject is, I would increasing in their rise, like it's talked more and more, so we would see higher percentage over time of micro-dialogues that discuss on this topic, which we actually didn't see. We didn't see any change, any significant change. And another interesting thing that we saw is that most of the micro-dialogues that did discuss weather or climate was actually about stuff that's related to self-care, interpersonal communication, therapy, stress, or leisure activities. So for example, I couldn't go to a walk last week because it was rainy. I missed the session, the therapy session, because I don't know, it was a bad weather. Or I went to vacation, it was sunny and amazing. So to conclude, we saw here that the explicit mention of climate change or global warming is pretty rare. We don't see it a lot. The climate discussions remain infrequent, often tied to self-care or leisure. Okay, so the topics are not fully related to anxiety. Clients with more depressive or anxiety symptoms discuss climate and weather less. This is also a thing that we saw. When they talk more about weather, they're actually less anxious or depressed. And the last thing, or the nicest thing for me, I would say, is that we actually can use data and NLP, to offer valuable support to advance the psychological fit. So we actually use the data that we have, the tools that we have here, the data science tools, to advance the field and empower the field. That's it. Thank you.
I wonder if you got the chance to look at like data that's like more years back or even like a lot more years back, but maybe it's not like the percentages are very low, maybe they're like higher than they were 20 years ago when climate change was not that much in awareness.
It's a good question. First, yeah, the question is if we looked at data that was even more years backwards, and the claim was that maybe the percentage is low, but it's higher compared to data for 4 or 5 years ago. So we don't have data before. I don't remember when it started.
30 months.
Yeah, 30 months.
2000.
But I think 30 months, which is a lot of time, we would expect to see any increase over this time period. It's not like 2 or 3 months data. And this was part of our, we expected to see increase. We did.
What do you think the political organization actually has explicitly? I mean, saying, how do you feel about the general state of the world and now you worry that there are future people might be thinking about climate change, but they won't say climate change. But yes, I am worried about the way things are going, that things are going to be worse with the level of my parents and so on, which, you know, you don't mention the word because the world's going to be hot and everybody will go nuts because of that.
Yeah, so this is a great comment. Actually, it's in our discussion. Yeah, so what's her name? Dan commented that perhaps patients doesn't speak about it in the therapy, but they are affected from it, right? This is your...
Yeah, I think it's not explicitly asked on the protocol.
Yeah. So I would say 2 things about it. First of all, documentation. We also analyze documentation, and again, we had only 15 minutes for lecture, but we also analyze documentation, and we didn't see almost any mention to this topic. This is another very interesting point. But what you said is really something that we discussed about in the paper. We assume that there are topics in the past that in the history of psychology where a topic wasn't discussed. Right? I think racism and similar topics I actually don't remember now. Maybe some of the clinical analysts remember. But it wasn't discussed in there. It took time for the community to understand it's an issue and it needs to be discussed. Right? So this is one of our assumptions that maybe this is the reason that we don't see it in like real life therapy.
Your assumption, because you talk about climate anxiety, but you looked at climate mentioning. You're not necessarily, so your understanding of climate anxiety was according to the topics, and if you saw in topic stress, you said, okay, this topic is climate anxiety, because what you checked is the mentioning of climate, not exactly.
So first of all, yes, the topic, we expected to see topics that more relate, less to leisure, more to the stress, anxiety, stuff like this. And this 5 is just an example, but when we look at the entire list, it's something that we see repeat itself. And second of all, our assumption was that if this is an issue for you, we will talk about it a lot. So we would mention this. This was the basic assumption here.
Okay, we need to.
Okay, so we need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is amazing data, brilliant work. We're going to have time to ask more questions for the speakers after our next talk. We're going to have a few minutes break. So I'm happy to introduce Andre. Right here. Kormilitsin. Yes, yeah, that. So Andre is a group lead at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oxford. He's also a member of Oxford Mathematical Institute. Andre's research is centered around applications of statistical machine learning, NLP, and the mathematics of multi-dimensional data streams can be applied to improving the detection, treatment, and monitoring of interventions in mental health. So thank you, Andre, for coming here.
Thank you very much for inviting me and presenting. I'll try to stick to half an hour. First of all, welcome and thank you very much. And today I'm going to discuss one of our research that we do in our lab with our colleagues, psychiatrists and clinicians, is how to identify mentions of self-harm in clinical notes.
If you can just beat the center and talk more to the mic for this to
Okay, good. Right, and just following good tradition, I started by folks. I'd like to introduce what brought me here and my connection to mental health. So, thank you, Tolia, for introducing. I have a small research group in Oxford, and I spend my time between Mathematical Institute and Department of Psychiatry. I have a master, doctorate students, and postdocs working on the applications of data science and tools, computational tools applied to the wealth of a psychiatric and mental health data. So being very lucky at Department of Psychiatry, I'm sitting on top of a pile of really amazing data, such as unstructured clinical notes, really massive clinical notes, a structured field, say CT scans, imaging, time series wearable devices, and so on and so forth. So it's really a treasure trove for data science and us. And what we do as a methodologist, we collaborate with clinicians, psychiatrists, nurses, and we're trying to answer different questions, spanning a wide range of fields, such as using NLP to extract information from clinical notes for pathological analysis, working with children and adolescent psychiatrists on autism, longitudinal multimodal data analysis, and work developing deployable tools, and of course working with patient and public involvement in order to make sure that our tools they make sense to people. Right, so the main topic in our discussion is about self-harm. So self-harm is defined as an act of a hurt or an act of self-poison or self-injury, regardless of its intent. So we do not care what was the main reason for self-harming behavior. We want to identify cases where people start self-harming or causing damage to their bodies. And self-harm is a really big problem nationally and across many, many countries as well. So self-harm, in some cases, self-harm leads to suicides, and based on national statistics in England, there are over 5,000 cases per year of people dying by suicide, compared to 400 in Israel, which is good. And many people who self-harm, they end up in hospitals. They've been admitted to hospitals, over 200,000 people every year, which of course puts lots of burden on the health system. And the main problem is not the burden on the health services, but rather people who went undetected. So the majority of people, they simply do not seek help. And this is the problem, because these people, they just go undetected. It causes lots of stress and problems to their family members, their loved ones, and therefore, if we can help some kind of groups of people, we can help. It will be great. I'm not a clinician. Do you have a question?
How many out of the 5,006 had before?
Well, it's a great question. So let's discuss it later. Okay, I just want to. It's a good question. So just come back. Okay. So I just jumped one slide. Right. So I'm not a clinician, so I cannot confidently speak about the reasons for self-harming behavior, but usually based on clinical literature, is to people self-harm to reduce a tension or a psychological distress. So I'm sure there are lots of psychologists in this audience, and you know guys better than me what may cause to self-harm. Usually this is the way how people can express themselves. Sometimes they punish themselves because they feel really miserable. They do not deserve good life or other problems. And And the importance, it's needless to highlight the importance why we need to research this field, but at least some points is, first of all, is to develop tools to assess what's early detect potential cases or subgroups of people who are at high risk of self-harming behavior. If we can identify that, we can then intervene. We can identify such people and invite some clinical trials. So, for example, a company like MS or others, if you can find your target, perhaps you can invite and try different interventions early and see the outcomes. And of course, pharmaceutical companies, if there are any medication available to reduce motion stress or help people. And from the research perspective, it's important to understand the prevalence of this self-harming behavior for epidemiological analysis. So the problem we're solving a very specific problem. We're not going to solve with Khalid and others. We're not solving all problems so far. So we narrowed down to very specific, which is really pertinent to the health system in England. So we want to identify mentions of self-harm in clinical notes. Of course, there are specialized questionnaires that could be used for self-harm assessment, like but usually the health system in the UK and Australia as well, which is different from the US one. In England, clinicians usually do not start giving lots of specialized questionnaires to people. When a patient comes to see a psychiatrist starts a dialogue to discuss the problems, and then the doctor writes down comments. So it is all written in natural language. Some doctors, like in primary care, they may have some questionnaires they may use, but it's not really prevalent. So the problem we want to focus is to how to identify mentions of self-harm in administrative data, which is essentially clinical notes or summaries. And so what we did, we started our dialogue with clinicians because we wanted to mimic the behavior, we wanted to learn how to design a automated system to translate clinical knowledge to automated and run clinical notes. So it was all done in a collaboration with clinicians. So we met several times over several iterations. So first of all, we identified, and also it was empirically confirmed by looking at the data itself, that usually clinicians can summarize mention of self-harm in a sentence. So the sentence, it was our unit of text, which we looked at. Basically, we were breaking down the whole document into sentences, and then we've been analyzing. The next thing was how we can mimic the clinical thinking in terms of NLP tools that are available. Clinicians usually they start looking for certain keywords like overdose, deliberate self-harm, a ligature, note, or burning, cutting, and so on and so forth, and which could be captured by an entity recognition task. We also added relation instruction to identify mentions or relations between different entities, and clinicians, and to mimic the way how clinicians decide whether there is a mention or absence of self-harm in this multi-label sentence classification task. So for multi-label, because we want to identify both the presence or absence of self-harm and capture the temporality. The temporality is extremely important for understanding the text. If someone self-harmed yesterday, there is a difference between someone who self-harmed 20 years ago, because we can then intervene, we can act quickly, and then we can change. As you know, as probably the majority of you know, that self-harm, that recent self-harm is the highest risk factor for following self-harms. So if you can capture quickly people, help them, you can significantly improve their outcomes in the future. And what we did next, so then our team, we started doing pretty much following the standard well-established steps that have been discussed previously by the others people. We took Bergkamp because it simply performs quite nicely. We didn't show Bart because it was good enough things as well. We tried to be pragmatic, exactly. So here the point was not to develop the top state-of-the-art used tools that to new employees email, but rather be a really pragmatic something which works really well for clinical advice. So we just fine-tuned and did a bit of a domain adaptation to capture so the tokenizing effects. It will be captured nicely. And then we ask clinicians to annotate an initial sample of data. So here I'm speaking about multi-level sentence classification because the anti-recognition task usually is a lot simpler, and especially if you use a hybrid approach where you have an ontology of keywords, you can mix them, and usually the token classification task is way easier. So I will only focus on a multi-level certification. So we asked clinicians to annotate the initial sample, we trained a baseline model, and then we got into this improvement loop where we developed a custom interface. It was a web-based interface REST API, where the clinicians, they sat down in front of the computer and the computer were presenting predictions of the model. So it would picture like a sentence, like he just cut his arm yesterday, and the model was presenting later. And clinicians should have clicked on confirm or change. It was a part of a kind of active learning approach. So we did it here in this loop. And after several iterations, it's still work in progress, by the way, but then clinicians realized actually it's not bad. So those of you who work with a data annotation, so you can understand there is a massive trade-off between how many samples you can annotate, how much you should pay to your annotators to do the job, and the delta of improvement you can achieve. So when we reach the good sample, and these are the preliminary results of the model. So this is for just remind you, for multi-label sentence classification, whether there is a presence or absence of self-harm, as well as a temporality of self-harm. So, and I haven't discussed the irrelevant label. I will make it clear in just a second. So for self-harm, we've got a recall over 90%, which is not bad. It means we're capturing over 90% of cases. Precision was a bit poor because of so those who work with the real clinical data can understand how dirty and noisy it is. So to get lots of time, we can get thousands of examples to converge. So it's still work in progress. So this for temporality, we've got poor results, which is not surprising because it's way easier to identify presence or absence of samples rather than to capture the temporality. And I will show you several examples just to justify the reason why this is tricky. So these are different examples. So these are all totally made up examples, which are based on real clinical notes. So the first one, the model added directly to these are short sentences. So for example, voices were telling him to jump off the bridge, and the model correctly identified as no stands for no self-harm. There is no self-harm because there is no actual act of self-harm. So it could be voices, it could be so we don't know for sure to jump off the bridge. Here the model did it incorrectly, so the model thought it is unknown. Unknown stands for the category which captures whether it is impossible to determine whether it is self-harm or not. So it's kind of the gray area. So the model is correct because obviously there is no self-harm. So we're only discussing the actual thoughts of self-harm. So this is an intent, it's not actual. And here is another example where the model did correctly with both labels. So it was on self-harm as well, because she has engaged several times and turned out around mixed ligature with intent to take her life. So it means that she has been doing for a period of time. Also, so this is why the model put the temporality unknown. So it is not recent and it is not in the past. It could be it is ongoing, but it also is quite difficult to decide from this short sentence. So clinicians agree that this prediction was correct. And here is a bit a larger multiple sentence. It mimics a short snippet from info notes. And so I have 4 sentences. And if you run through the model, this is what we get. And here the label of irrelevant becomes quite apparent. So we wanted to filter out sentences that are irrelevant or they completely do not contain any information about self-harm. Like I saw a cat, or for example, today I saw this gentleman presented with depression. There is no information about self-harm. So we tried different methods to filter out. So we use sentence similarity as well, and so on and so forth. And then we just tried to include. So essentially, what we did, we prepared lots of sentences that have been chosen not to contain information about self-harm. And then we trained this category as well. Apparently, the model was quite good. So the first sentence was designated as irrelevant. And the second sentence was predicted correctly, so the both labels. It is essentially self-harm, it is an ongoing self-harm, and also the time is recent. Because despite the fact that he has been harming since age 17, this is an ongoing process as well. The third, of course, is infrared, and it was correctly identified as no self-harm, because first of all, we're talking about a family member, not the person itself, and also there is the fact of suicide, rather not a self-harm. However, when I played with the model, I tried to tweak to see the sensitivity to tokens. So what do if we change a little bit? And interestingly, the model, so if I ended like cutting his wings, we already see that the probability, so the model was not certain about whether it's self-harm or not, so just decided to put unknown, and also probability for being unknown, it's not really high, it's like only 80%. And also the model was contemplating between, say, with self-harm as well. And of course, it depends on the threshold, because the word cutting usually statistically was associated with self-harming behavior. So we have certain keywords like burning, ligature, and they like taking, not to trigger the audience. So there are certain keywords that are really strongly associated with the annotated labels of self-harm. And in some cases, model can overfit to these words. And this is a really great challenge I'm going to discuss in my next slide about and what kind of challenges we've seen. So first of all, we've hit lots of challenges. And it's a really tricky one because self-harm is usually comes with other cases such as suicidality and the other behaviors which we need to disambiguate, which is a big, and of course, we cannot sit down and annotate thousands of examples like ImageNet folks have done for millions of examples. This is why we're having such great accuracy of distinguishing cats, dogs, and airplanes. So we can't afford the help. So we need to be creative. So the first of all is to how to aggregate predicted labels per sentence. If you have a clinical note, like a typical summary with 20, 50, 100 sentences, how do you make your final decision verdict, whether there is a person? It's a question, because obviously you will have contradicting sentences, you will have different temporalities. How do you think? So what we agreed with the Dr. Guillaume and the clinician, so if there is at least one mention of recent self-harm, we would regard the whole note as containing recent case, because this is how clinicians usually do. So clinicians usually start describing history, past events, and so forth, but also they will highlight that it's essentially someone self-harmed yesterday or a week ago, he or she may be admitted to a hospital due to self-harm. So at least we have one case, one signal with regard to the whole document as having self-harm. Second, whether the annotation scheme we developed or the way how we try to manipulate thinking was good enough to capture exactly what we want. What are the edge cases? How do we capture what we do not capture? So we've done quite a lot of analysis and we've checked as well. So, and also those who work with annotation and implementation, you know that the annotation schema, it's not written in stone, it's something really kind of a live document which you will iteratively improve over time, because when you get a bit more and more experience and understanding of the matter. Second is, which I already showed, it's token sensitivity. In some cases, it is the right thing to do. In some cases, just simple model overfitting. And we need to disambiguate and understand sometimes that there are real words that are associated with poor outcomes that may enhance, for example, the weights. We can check the weights of each word. We can run all sorts of, we can check the weights of transformers or like sharp values or any explainability methods. In some cases, the token sensitivity is a bad thing, so we can introduce noise, or for example, like back translation, or like people doing vision, so you introduce, kind of augmentation, so we can do as well to reduce, but it should be done in a controlled pattern. And of course, how do we evaluate the system? What's the right metric to evaluate the system? whether it is NLP-based metric, whether how do you capture what's your precision for multiplication of token, whether do you capture the span boundaries to surface of text correctly, or rather, if you may not care about the NLP side, but if you're able to identify all people who self-harmed and you identify correctly, probably this is the right metric. So it's very iterative process. You need to understand what exactly you are developing. So with clinicians, we are discussing, and I believe I have 4 minutes left just to show something that I'm really sure just trying to stay, but well, it was a bit of a spoiler. And of course, now we live in the era of large language models, and you can rightfully ask, why bother? Why we need to learn classic? This is what I put like kind of classic NLP cases. You don't need to read the book of Chris Money. You don't need to watch these courses on YouTube. You can just go directly to ChatGPT or GPT-4 and run everything exactly as guys. You brilliantly touch on this point as well. It's on retrade. So what I did, I took exactly this sentence about I'm sorry, I think you can't see it, but it was exactly this snippet I showed previously. The snippet, I actually plugged it into the GPT-4 as subscription, and I asked a very, very simple prompt without any tweaking. Identify if there is an actual mention of some harm in the text. And if you read the response of ChatGPT, and I showed it to colleagues and to clinicians, and they have been really surprised to the extent what the GPT was able to correctly identify. It not only identified correctly, it also explained why it was correct. So it just identified. It's interesting. So despite that the person has a history, which indicates ongoing behavior, not just past occurs. This is exactly how the or public self-harm searchers would have approached these questions. So there is a massive yes.
Can you show again this slide?
Yes. Sorry, yeah. You mean this text? Yes, so it says, has a history of self-harm since age 17, which he's occasionally doing. This is a typical language used by clinicians in notes. And the ChatGPT was able to do it nicely. The problem is we can't do it. We can't send data. If you remember, there was, I think it was the Cole, or there was another chatbot got into troubles on talk therapy a year ago, something, Cooler Health or something. So they developed interface and the talk therapy, but essentially using OpenAI API to send. I think they haven't explained properly in their consent form. There was some problem. They just didn't touch on, which is the right thing to do. You can't just lie to clients. And interestingly, so of course, there is a massive promise of language models. And what I found, it was published by a few weeks ago in mid-March by a team of German researchers. What they did, they just took Llama 2 model and they trained, because obviously this is what they're saying, we cannot use external resources like Claude, Gemini, or GPT, OpenAI, even with Microsoft Azure. I think Microsoft is doing really great, not advertising, so I'm not getting wrong. Selfishly, I really want to use GPT-4, I think, but we're still not here. And so what people did, so they did just Llama 2, they fine-tuned, they did prompt engineering with chain of thoughts, and a bit of pretty much standard tweaks, and they achieved a really decent accuracy, 87% to detect suicidality, and sensitivity at 83, and specificity at 91, which I think is a really great result and clearly demonstrates the promise of large language models. But well, Llama 2 is not, I don't remember exactly which Llama version. Now I have a Jumbo and other just came out recently with like massive contextual window length we can use. And this just clearly represents the promise of large language models in the future, as long as we can ensure the patient safety and data governance procedures. Thank you.
Yes, and perhaps we could use AWS Bedrock, so with a public cloud, so people.
Okay, this is a great point. So, where I work, so the National Health Services, they have they work with the Microsoft Azure, so all the implementation from Microsoft Azure, and I think it will be problematic to me, but I'm not aware whether you can use problems, whether you can use the same. Obviously, I mean, so once it becomes available, everyone will jump on this possibility.
Can you explain again the need of this classification? Because you said that it's important to understand the temporality.
Yes.
So we can help if something is urgent. But if those are transcriptions of sessions with therapists, then the therapist knows that, like, he can notice it by himself without the need of using the classifier.
Yes, this is correct. So first of all, the main reason is to identify if you want to run a retrospective studies or epidemiological analysis. So for example, we want to understand, so when people self-harm, and if you want to identify it, so for example, we can run it automatically on clinical notes, then we can understand, so how much people self-harm last month. And then you can act. That's absolutely right. If you see someone, like if you're a psychiatrist and you see a patient, say, oh, this is part, of course, psychiatrist will refer to the right, but also it will be in notes as well. So this information, yes.
Only for analysis, it's not helping the patients.
Well, sometimes clinicians may not refer immediately. So we can then identify if someone did self-harm within a month, or for example, within several weeks, we can then alert again. So clinicians, they should not think that clinicians will always refer a patient at exactly the same time. So there might be some delays or something as well. But yes, usually, so the main motivation to identify a self-harm and temporality, it is for epidemiological studies, and to identify the prevalence and data. And
so I'm not going to look at whether you have the access to the data to classify on whether a patient would either undergo self-harm or would they have the intervention before that, which was aimed at preventing that. I mean, again, in some cases, somebody might instead of killing themselves, you have the ambulance or have the treatment, but still in both cases, it's an intervention, which is really the outcome we want to predict. So why not go for that, assuming that you had access to that data and it's a problem?
Well, that's exactly what, at the moment, we don't have access to the data. No, but this brings a question, absolutely. So, however, it is also needed to understand what kind of treatments people have received, or whether there was any response. For example, it could be written in clinical notes that someone who self-harmed, they then have been prescribed CBT therapy or started on antidepressants, for example, if it comes up, and then you can follow and then you can understand whether there was any effect or not. So you can essentially analyze at scale. But of course, we don't have access to data.
Did you see what type of examples are intended to confuse the model?
Yes, we do. We analyze and see. So, for in some cases, so first put here just put some of them. So it is so when we have a conflicting or a words with opposite meaning. So, for example, like suicide ideation, which is not a self-harm. Also, we have cutting or burning in the same sentence. So the words that they contradict each other in some sense. I was trying to think of a good example, like someone heard voices of cutting things, or for example, doing something as well. So these are not actual self-harm, but these are words that usually associate. So if you look at the annotated examples, you will see the prevalence of certain keywords that are strongly associated with self-harm. And if you see words that are less strongly annotated, or for example, with no self-harm, and if you see that it depends on the distribution of such word in the sentence, it will be really confusing to the model if we don't have enough data. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to trade off between the a lack of high quality data and just to find the trade-off, what we can achieve with fewer results. Yes. Sorry, could you speak up, please?
What is the usually people that self-harm, like hurt themselves, you won't see it. It comes in like the decision of the moment. They won't tweet on it or post on it. So usually they won't work on it, and if it's to identify or be in clinic, so usually there will be a doctor to talk to them. So I wonder when do you think, like in which situations is that for the tool up?
It's a good question. So so this is mostly done for epidemiological analysis to identify cases and relations between what people have done and what they have received. So this is not an online tool which can act upon quickly or refer or triage to certain. Well, if it is the case, by the way, it can do so. For example, if clinicians write, so now it essentially can help clinicians to refer or to suggest certain routes to refer a patient given this information. So, for example, it may refer to which team what mental health specialist team the patient may be referred to, given the information provided in some. So if someone who self-harmed and also have been, for example, like eating disorders, self-harming, lost parents, it should also be the tool that can identify this information, can help clinicians triage this patient into kind of a downstream pathways, kind of care pathways. So basically, we have a thought about designing a tool with the epidemiological studies in mind. So we want to start identifying the prevalence, associations with self-harm, to find people and whether we can invite clinical trials and see what kind of interventions we can make. But also, there is another problem of triaging. So people who self-harm, probably they should be seen by certain specialist teams. So for example, like early intervention, psychosis, the eating disorders, so it could be depression or other teams as well. Within mental health, the area, the psychiatry. And this tool potentially can help based on the contextual information in clinical law, the way how a psychiatrist summarized the course. I'm not sure if my answer was right.
I just think that if a doctor see it, this is where specialty people know.
Well, in the ideal world, it's yes.
Want to say it?
No, that's fine. I just want to think about the questions.
We will take a short break now, and after that, we will have a panel. At the end of the panel, we might understand if the LLM is going to replace psychiatry also. Thank you.
So we're in the beginning of the very exciting part of the panel, talking about bridging AI and mental health. I want to present the moderator, which spoke before but wasn't actually presented. Dr. Talia Tron is a senior NLP researcher at KFL, a faculty member in the Digital Medical Technologies program at HIP, and a co-founder of MEDS. Talia holds a PhD in computational neuroscience from the Hebrew University, where she applied machine learning tools to analyze and research facial expressions and motor behavior in schizophrenia. And we know apparently a lot of people in common. So Talia, go ahead.
It's my turn, thank you. Now it's my turn to present our panelists. Andre, I already pronounced your last name once, so it's enough for me. Dr. Mark Meresco is an experienced psychiatrist and digital mental health consultant and entrepreneur. Is that okay? He worked for 14 years as a staff data scientist and assistant professor in psychiatry at the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal. Mark is also a pioneer in the field of home-based telepsychiatry. And he launched his own telepsychiatry clinic and co-founded a Canada digital mental health startup. startup. Today, he is the VP of Behavioral Health at Antidote Health and a strategy consultant in digital and mental health. Noah Nitzan. Noah is a project manager at GEHA Innovation Center. She started as an occupational therapist and she has extensive experience bridging the clinical field with innovation and so many long words. Stop, it's okay. Technology. Noah also is a user experience designer and accessibility consultant. A lot of our work focuses on inclusive design to promote products that will suit and be helpful to as many people as possible. And last but not least, Natalia Shapiro, is the team leader of the clinical analyst here at Antidote. Her team the panel is going to be better than the introductions, I promise you. Her team works tightly with the data scientists to create the data necessary for model development and validation of the model performance to fit the needs of LMS users. So, and we had a lot of interesting discussions here about the potential of machine learning and LLMs, NLP in general in the world of therapy. With a focus, Elias mostly talked about the talk therapy. And in this panel, we're going to discuss, let me see exactly what the title was, is how recent developments in NLP can help improve mental care and talk therapy in psychiatric setting. So I would like us to start by you telling me just a bit about your day-to-day work and what do you perceive as the challenges in the world of talk therapy and psychiatry today? Just like shortly, if you can do it. I know there's so many challenges, but we're gonna just touch upon it.
So most of my day-to-day work here at Helios is about getting close with the data about therapy, getting close with everything that has to do with how the therapy goes on and how the documentation happens. So that's like the main issue that Helios here focuses on, the burden of documentation. But I do not believe that it's the only thing that is like a barrier for therapy in the world. There's a lot of other things that I wish for us to get to in the future. And there's a lot of things about the quality of therapy, how not so goodly trained clinicians get to give good quality therapy, as well as a big issue of demand. And that's one of the issues that we are talking about here, like how really high demand for therapy with very little therapists available and very little hours, and reducing burdens on therapists can allow them to be able to give more therapy or they give better quality therapy that would end up being shorter. And so, yeah, that's like very in short. There's a lot more that I can say, but
well, I'm not working with the talk therapy mostly on my day-to-day, but I would like to share. So I'm working with clinicians, nurses, and I'm trying to bridge mathematical methods with patients and how to apply methods. One of the challenges is actually to explain in common language with clinicians and to understand what kind of methods or what clinicians actually want, how to translate the problems or the questions they have to the methods we can apply. And this one of the big challenges is to bridge the gap between the mathematical people and clinical world.
I will move to, I apologize, I think it's for me because I'm moving to the group. Talking today about language and mental health, so I think it will be better for me. אז אני חושבת, זה ממשיך הרבה את מה שדובר קודם, הנקודות בעיקר של המטפלים לפחות זה הזמן שמתבזבז, דברים שהם כביכול טכניים. אז חוץ מהטוק תרפי שדובר היום, יש עוד הרבה דברים אחרים מסביב, יש לנו שאלונים וכיבודים של המון זמן, שמתבזבז זמן יקר, מטפלים מאוד מתוסכלים מזה שהזמן לא הולך על האסנס האמיתי שלשמו הם נמצאים, הזמן שיכול להיות מתורגם לזמן טיפול, ומטופלים אחרים שזה מצרך מאוד יקר היום. עכשיו, חוץ מהזמן הזה מדובר בחלקים, והכתיבה והתיעוד זה משהו שגם יש לו חשיבות באיזשהו מובן. התיעוד הוא עוד עיבוד של הטיפול, אנחנו לא רוצים שהטכנולוגיה תיקח את זה לתעזור לזה, ואולי נדבר על זה תכף, אבל בתוך החלקים הטכניים האלה, לפעמים יש דברים שאולי רק מכונה יכולה לעשות, וזה גם משהו שיכול לתסכל מן הצד השני, כמו דברים שאפשר לכמת אותם ולמדוד אותם, דברים שאדם לא יכול לעשות, ניואנסים קטנים שקורים בשיחה, לזהות מגמות בטיפול, אפילו יעילות של הטיפול. אני אגיד רק שמהצד של המטופלים, שזה לא פחות חשוב, מדברים פה על זמני המתנה מטורפים, וזה עוד לפני המשבר הגדול שקרה לנו, לפני כמה חודשים, בבתי חולים בפריסה, גם בחדרי המיון, גם במחלקות וגם מרכזי שיקום בקהילה. עכשיו מערכת גם ככה במערכת מורעבת. אז זה החלקים, וגם כשמטופל מגיע בסוף למטפל, שזה בטח במגזר הציבורי, עוד יותר לוקח הזמן, לא תמיד פוגש מטפל שהוא מרגיש מספיק נוח איתו, או שמספיק מיומן בשביל לטפל בבעיה הספציפית שהוא הגיע. וזה ככה שני הצדדים.
I'm going to really shortly repeat what you said.
So I'm going to repeat a little bit what other people said. I have two kind of roles. One, I'm a clinician, so I'm working with patients all the time, and I see their needs. But also for the company I work with, we're a healthcare provider, we're also a healthcare insurer. So our job is to serve a large number of people and make sure that at a very high level, patients can get the care that they need. So we're building a system. Either way, what we recognize is there's nowhere near enough therapists to handle all the mental health needs anywhere in the world. Not just Israel post October 7th, but everywhere in the world, this is the main problem. Why? Mental health issues affect up to 20% of the population. The majority of this includes depression, anxiety. These are conditions where psychotherapy is a first-line treatment. It works very well, but it's a first-line treatment that most people cannot get because there's not enough therapists available. So what's the role of AI? For sure, I agree. Any tool that can make therapists more efficient in their time would be great so that you increase capacity. Any tool that could improve the performance or upskill therapists is also great, because what you also have right now is a situation where organizations are using therapists with less and less skill, lower credentials to meet the needs, and also offering fewer and fewer sessions. So people are getting poor quality therapy. So if there's a way to maintain a basic good quality of care, that's excellent. And I think what's going to eventually happen, and maybe I don't know how many years, is eventually starting to use these machine models to become therapists, and eventually perhaps even replacing human therapists. Yeah.
So Mark, you already answered my second question, which is how do you think AI systems should address these challenges and where can they be useful? So I would also like the other panelists to maybe say, where do you see the potential? And if you can just say a few words about the recent development in LLMs where you see huge potential that was not there before.
אני חושבת שהפוטנציאל הכי גדול יהיה במקום שזה באמת ייעל את הטיפול. אז I agree that maybe it will replace one day. Maybe it's a cultural thing, I don't know. But we hear it more and more that maybe it will replace the therapists. I think that's our thinking, yeah, that the best way is the combination where the machine can help us to make conclusion and to get to insight that we cannot do without it. So maybe it's something we will get there, but the best will be it will help us to be more efficient. I don't know if we replace it and to let us at least do, I don't know, 80% of our technical work to be replaced. Yes.
I fully agree with all speakers and they just mentioned. But there is another problem I'd like to raise is, first of all, we need to ensure the right guardrails in place. Because as we know, all LLMs, they hallucinate. They always hallucinate. Sometimes their hallucinations, they make sense to us. Sometimes it doesn't. But they always hallucinate. This is the nature of generated models. They generate token by token based on large variety of things they have seen. The problem is, if you Google Belgian man committed suicide after talking to chatbot therapist, you recently. So they are working with Belgians and I wasn't aware of the situation I just mentioned. There was a situation in Belgium where a man, so he was really anxious about climate change. As today it was raised. And he was really anxious and has a wife, children, so pretty much well. But he started talking to a chatbot. I'm not sure which one was not mentioned, for different reasons. And eventually the chatbot told him, well, so perhaps you should commit suicide if you're so distressed. And you can Google it, just literally Belgian man suicide chat, and you will find the first Belgian news, whatever. And so this is why it's extremely important. So I wholly agree. So we don't have enough qualified help, psychiatry and mental health. We can think of replacing or augmenting by providing more sensible, just quote sensible talking machines. But we need to make sure that these machines, they do not derail. How we can ensure these guardrails. So for example, if now you like go to ChatGPT and ask, oh, just draw me a picture of, something outrageous, it will say, no, you can't do it. So what I've been doing myself, our research, I wanted to generate synthetic data, which is quite common practice. I asked and I started quite fast. I said, look, I'm an academic researcher. I said, prompt, academic researcher, could you please generate a sample of 10 clinical notes containing information about self-harm? And I've been rejected immediately. When I tried to post ChatGPT, I've been warned that I will be blocked. So there are certain guardrails already implemented. However, I think especially in psychotherapy, we need to make sure that these models, they do not cause any harm, or this kind of essence of medicine. First of all, do not cause any harm. And also these models, they should be transcultural aware. So different people that have different needs, coming from different religions, belief, or backgrounds, and the machine should be able to accommodate correctly these differences. This is what we see in psychiatry. So, for example, it's called like transcultural literacy in psychiatry, where you should be able to accommodate your therapeutic ways to different clients, different patients. That the way you treat them, it just suits them. So, from my perspective, we need to think about right guardrails and how to make sure machines do not harm. So, I'm less enthusiastic about mental machines to replace. Probably will at some point, but as far as we can ensure that they do not cause harm.
I hate to be the one that very loudly disagrees, but I think that even with all the correct guardrails in place, there's the market of mental health is just now maturing to the first steps of being able to use AI in basic things that would make everyone else be like, okay, yeah, I'm using AI to generate a note. What's the big deal about it? Even without the recording and everything that the team here talked about, the world of mental health has a lot to gain from AI before it even gets to the point of needing to gain from being replaced by AI. And I believe that even if we get to a point where all the right guardrails are in place, the value of human-to-human connection is something that cannot be replaced by AI in any form. And there is a huge value in creating a lot of other solutions, and to not just say what not I think that there is a lot to do in terms of helping people reach therapists, helping people find the correct therapist for them, helping therapists have less burden, helping organizations be better at providing therapy in a way that is accessible. There is a lot that AI can do in those worlds before it even reaches the point of trying to replace any therapist. And I think that training therapists is something that AI can do a lot for. So that's like my take on it.
Thank you. Noah, you said you talked about like on one side of this panel we have AI is going to replace us, and then like AI is only good for administrative stuff and not even so yet. And I love this because I think this is exactly the kind of discussions people are having, and not only in psychiatry, right? They're thinking like, will AI replace all of us? Am I even needed anymore? As a data scientist, I am afraid. And you said like there are some things that we even the administrative, what we call administrative stuff, it's part of the clinical therapy, right? We don't want them to completely take notes from us. So this is one aspect that I would love to, maybe if you can elaborate a bit more about. What do you think, where do you think the line should be between the human and the machine?
I think that, first of all, for people to really use it, the therapist has to have, the first question is, what is it for me, right? It has to be for a real need, a real pain point. And this is a lot about wasting time. But if we talk about where it is balanced, I think that two things. First of all, therapists have intuition, and they usually don't want others to take their intuition from them. And the second, and that not just therapists, we all don't like people or products thinking for us. So I think the best will be, I mean, it's great to have a conclusion, something written at the end of the session. But what I'm going to do with that, how it helped me to think, how it helped me to make conclusion or insight that I cannot do, to help me think better, to get insight that I cannot do without this machine. Again, the combination between the person and the machine, I think still it will save us a lot of time because it will, because we talk a lot about this, how much time it takes for therapists to write. So it's still saving a lot of time, but let us make a better treatment and get to better conclusion that we cannot do without the machine. So I think this would be the best way.
Thank you. Well, what about, this is one thing that wasn't raised here, what about using AI tools as like a co-pilot in the treatment? Do you think this is something that might happen? Like you as a therapist come to the patient and play around with AI to do like treatment. Do you think this is something that can it's a surprising question. I didn't prepare you. I just thought about it.
So I just said something that I think I think that first of all we have to ask what the patient will feel like when we have another friend in our in the room. And I want to say another thing that we see a lot in India. I mean, there is a lot of avoidance around therapists, especially in mental health. So maybe it's not you or myself, because we're people that like innovation and we're thirsty for solution, for new solution, because like I said, we are in a starving field. And so we're looking for a solution, but don't think that every therapist is like that. They're very diverse. And some of them are the opposite. Some of them are looking for that. Some of them are really afraid of new technology. We work very hard to make our staff be more positive about technology. So it's not very easy for them even to use sometimes apps or virtual reality or augmented reality AI. But the AI is different because the AI is already there. It's not like to say I don't want to use the internet or something like that. So I think it's a process, and but we have to consider many things. And I think what you said before is very important, because how we make sure that everything that's going on there is under control and it's not going to be any harm. If we have this professional judgment all the time, it can work, but it has to be very controlled.
So you talked about a lot about autonomy. I'm sorry, Amber, do you want to add something?
So don't want to.
Mark, I'm going to have a question for you in a minute.
Now, I actually want to add to your, just to piggyback your comment. I think this is a hybrid mode of augmenting clinicians. This is first of all, I think the technology, exactly as you mentioned. So the essence of technology is to automate really a boring stuff, like summarizing, document, exactly things that humans can do, but machines can do it exactly the same way, but quickly. So, for example, if you want to find keywords or summarize text for Google, why won't you to delegate to machines? And then clinicians will, throughout their time, to do the job they should be doing, exactly like transcribing, summarizing. I fully agree, and this is exactly how machines should be used, or they should be augmenting clinicians. The problem is when exactly as you mentioned, for example, how we can think of augmenting clinicians or therapists by using such technologies. So, for example, a clinician can, or therapist, they can have a ChatGPT open next to them, and then a ChatGPT can listen to their discussion, and then to help. So, for example, say, hey, I think that the patient is a bit struggling with certain things, so why don't you? It can help navigate or discover things, like as you mentioned, things that a therapist are all humans. So they may be tired, they may miss, it could be Saturday night memory, it could be personal. So exactly. So as all, someone asked me, so what would happen in the ideal world? We should refer quickly, of course. But this is what exactly mentioned. We don't have enough qualified people. They just work crazy shit, and mental health as a field itself, it's really demanding. So what we can do, another problem, this is great to have an assistive technology to do. However, I hope I'm not going to make discussion because I have so many questions. Okay, so I'm just trying to make myself just cut the cheese. The question is whether the use of technology is the right way from the perspective of patients. I can give a very simple example. Just to mention, and this will be observed as well. So, for example, I've been working with people with LGBTQ+ communities. Sometimes they refuse to provide their sexual orientation because of being stigmatized. So, for example, and this is exactly what we see in clinical notes as well. So we see the prevalence of self-reported sexual orientation. So people tend to know to say they heterosexual. This is fine. However, the largest second prevalent category is the person declined to respond because and also being bisexual man. This is the kind of the most the category which people tend to not decline. So still there is lots of stigma. And just to mention the technology that will highlight to the clinician that the person sitting next to you is a gay. Question is it the right way of using technology? Can you, what is the right way of using data? Can you show without asking or without consenting the person to disclose something? It's called unobserved characteristics. So people at DeepMind, so we work in DeepMind as well, they published a brilliant paper, I think in 2021. It's called unobserved characteristics, something which is not explicitly put in a clinical note, but it could be deduced. So if a very large and capable language model, it can identify things that people do not want you to know. The question is whether this is the right way of using, whether it's assistive technology may reveal something. And this is just yet another angle to think of what is the right way. Sorry for dominating this. It's really exciting.
We are all dominating. Okay. You mentioned a lot of ethical concerns. So I heard autonomy. I heard about privacy. You talked about the consent. And also, and all of this you raised as concerns from fully automated machines that will serve or replace psychiatrists or therapists, and also what is the good way or the right way to use these tools. So all of this could be maybe one not objective, how do you say, like cons of or big limitations of using these tools. Another aspect that was raised here was intuition, human connection, as an argument against the LLMs. And now, Mark, I would like to hear your response on that.
So I knew that what I was going to say might be provocative. actually still believe it, whether it's going to be in 5 years or 20 years or 50 years, I don't know. And of course, yeah, there's a lot of problems to solve and work through and machines hallucinating and all that. But I think the whole question of intuition or the human connection, how essential is that ingredient in the therapy? There's interesting studies showing that for some chatbots, therapy chatbots that already exists, and these are just like cartoon chatbots, they've already demonstrated that patients will develop a positive therapeutic relationship to that chatbot.
Liza even, like the first ever chatbot, Liza, people were chatting to it as if it was a real person. We tend to humanize things.
So, exactly, I think the connection and oftentimes this feeling of being connected doesn't necessarily come from the other person to you, it comes from you. It's what you perceive towards the other person, meaning that if you're the patient, there are many therapies where the therapist will say very little. And in fact, they do it intentionally. They try to say as little as possible so that everything comes from the patient. And the patient starts to invent this whole world, this whole relationship with this person standing there who's saying very little. It comes a lot from the patient. So I think that we tend, I think, to romanticize a lot or give it like a special place to, you know, these abilities of another person to connect with a patient. I think that's true. I think it's important. I'm always thinking about the level, like at the healthcare system level. If I knew that all the therapists who are in my network, who are seeing our patients, are all excellent, highly trained, super intuitive and in tune people, that'd be wonderful. When I know that that's not the case, and when one patient has the good fortune to get to see the best therapist, and the next patient sees someone who does not help them at all, that's what really gets me thinking that we need to do better. And I see this all the time. I see patients going to therapists and it's not working, that it's not clicking. There's a lot of therapies out there. We heard about evidence-based therapy. All that means, evidence-based means there are certain strategies or techniques that are used that we think, we're not even sure, we think these are the magic sauce, the important ingredients in the therapy. And there are many types of therapy that are actually very, what we call, manualized. Manualized means that the therapist has very specific instructions of what kind of interventions to do based on what the patient is saying. It's like a script that you learn. In my mind, again, I'm not a data scientist or a computer programmer, but in my mind, that's a perfect task in a way for some of these language models because it is scripted. And just leave you with one more thought. One of the therapies that we're using right now that have been shown clinically to work as well as in-person therapy, we call it iCBT or digital CBT, where the patient will learn the material on their own. They take a course. And then they're just meeting with a coach for 50 minutes once a week to make sure they learn the material. And they can get good results. So again, I think we need to maybe like not romanticize therapy too much. Think about what are the main most important ingredients. And if we can deliver those at scale to patients, I think we'll already get better results than where we're at now.
Do you think that applies to all type of patients, to all type of therapy protocols? So what do you think, in an ideal world, what do you think the limit should be?
For sure, it's not going to apply to everybody. Just like psychotherapy doesn't apply to everybody. I have patients who come and say, just give me medication and I don't want to talk to anybody. So if we have other options available, that also makes it possible for patients who really want or cannot connect in other way to be able to see the therapists who are available. I don't think that anytime soon therapists will go out of work. We don't have enough. And probably the way this is going to work, if ever these things come into being, it's going to be for small, like for specific issues at first, for the patients who are the least severe, and it will happen slowly. There'll always be a need for sure for human therapists.
Anyone wants to comment?
Just a quick one. So when we're talking about probably, as you mentioned, so the therapist will go. If you remember when in the computer vision, this X-ray and all this started boom several years ago, people said, "Hey, we need to start. We need to stop training radiologists because AI will replace in 5 years' time." And this is absolutely not true. We still need to train radiologists to make sense of scans. However, we can now use more assistive technologies to help good radiologists to do their job quicker, better, and not to be, tired. And I think this is somehow can be translated to therapists as well. So this is my opinion. So we can, the momentum.
Yeah, I just wanted to add like a similar point to yours, and it's like when I was saying like therapists cannot be replaced by AI, I was not meaning like there's no places where AI can help patients. What I mean is like there is still a need for good trained therapists, and there is like a really big opening for creating a more balanced amount of therapists, like you were saying before, like some get a good therapist, some get the best trained therapist, or the new therapist, or the one that is just going through a divorce and is not focused in therapy. And like having ways to monitor the quality of therapies that people get, as well as being able to provide better training, is of course one of the first steps. And of course, tools that can aid therapy or can help patients that would not get to therapy, those are amazing tools that would want to have. And I think like the more digital therapies are usually better for clients that would have a hard time getting to therapy or would not otherwise meet a therapist, or that if they would try to meet a therapist, they would encounter all the barriers that are on the way to see a therapist. For example, finding the right therapist, matching with someone that matches with them, finding someone they can afford and has the right time for them. So those are all problems that we could solve either by creating solutions that would make therapy more accessible to those people, or by creating solutions that would make therapy not needed, like in-person therapy not needed for them.
And so now that we read what we're reading the levels for, I think that with the role of the patient, my last question would be about implementation. What do you guys perceive as the major challenges? And we already touched about some of those, and like hallucinations, and you also touched about trust. And if you can elaborate a bit more about where do you think the challenges will be, and maybe the considerations of people developing such technology and what needs to be taken into account.
I think I mentioned all before that first of all, many therapists are not very, I don't know how to say it, but easy with changes or technological changes. So they have to understand that it's really give them key value. And it's what I said before about how to help them. I agree about what you're saying, and it's not like I disagree with what's going to happen. And but still, I think that there is something that could be very, very big advantage if this the AI will help the clinician to get better conclusion. I think this is something that therapists will look for. And another point that, I mean, the AI is there, like it's there, and from one side I can say we don't have to use AI everywhere, but from the other side I can say it's there anywhere, and it doesn't have to be that it can change a little bit the setting, change the attitude. It doesn't mean that if I'm going to use AI in the treatment should look the same with and without the technology. I don't know if it's clear enough. When we start to use the technology in a setting of treatment, maybe it will look different. We don't have to be afraid that maybe the talk therapy will look different. And I think this is something the therapists are afraid of. They're afraid that it's going to change. And maybe it will change. And it doesn't have to look the same. That's what maybe it will change it a little bit.
I think that another barrier is like education to clients, like to patients. I think that being able to provide patients with like the right guidelines to when they can be aided by AI, or also therapists as well, like implementing as a therapist and being like, okay, where are the limits of this thing? Where am I trusting this thing blindly and where I'm not? Like, because we have seen like clinicians that are, like adopt like writing the note with Ilios, for example, and like click the link, that's it, I'm not reviewing this. With less trained clinicians more than not. So those are like the things that we need to look out for. But in the realm of therapy, we have a lot of people that are reaching out to get therapy and are not educated about what are the things that would make this therapy safe for them. Not even talking about AI. If we move AI from the picture, people are reaching out to therapists that are like charlatans that are selling them bottles of flower essences and telling them that will cure their ADHD. So we have a lot to do in the terms of educating the society about what good therapy is and what is good for them and what not, and having that breach of implementing into that AI would mean that people are not even having the interpersonal encounter to realize that that therapy is not good for them.
I can just, no, don't have
No, it's
sure. I just want to add that maybe it's obvious, but implementation is the most important thing. Because develop a new technology, especially in Israel, they develop technology all the time. It has to work very good, but it's the easy part. The more challenging part is the implementation. You know that most of the technology, the assistive technology, the technology implemented that's staying on the shelf, and people are not using it because of bad implementation. So good implementation means. First of all, it's for really good pain point or really need and is good value. But after people use it, they have to, the company or they have to follow up and to see that people know how to use it and to continue and develop it according to the needs of and to work all the time with the field. This is things that it's not happening in our center. Company and startups come in very late stage. They're in love with their idea, and when they come, they don't understand the settings or how is the process look like. And then it's great technology, it works great, but nobody is going to use it. So they have to understand, especially in this very sensitive setting. There's a question there.
That's a question.
Sorry.
I don't want to argue much, but I could argue so much several things which were said here, but particularly your case. The population of psychiatrists in Israel is aging. It's very well known that majority of them are coming from the Soviet Union. Now our current pension, they still must keep working. It's familiar because I have a family member who is a psychiatrist and all his friends who meet us during the family events of the psychiatrists from the same generation. And you're talking about the lack of acceptance of the new technologies by these populations that go back to the medical school and educate them from this. Go to the medical school and educate them there, and they will be more accepting the new technology when they will reach the level when they actually treat people. So I understand that currently has a challenge with the current population, but in the 10 or 12, 20 years, it won't be relevant because a huge population of psychiatrists will come from the academic is already this level of education.
Okay. So first of all, it wasn't a judgmental comment. I mean, it's just saying that don't to think that if you have a good solution, everybody will jump on it. This is a fact. So you can say that many of our therapists are greatest technology, maybe don't want to hear about it. This is a fact. And there is a difference between generations, right? There is a huge difference between the youngest and the all this. But I agree. I hope that they will learn more about technology and how to use it. Because it's a big cause of lack of knowledge and experience.
I can maybe try to answer maybe a little different way. We can also even ask, what is therapy? And ask how are these different technologies adopted or used. I think a lot of it is how we label it. There's a lot of people out there who go get help for the mental health issues. And they go to places like chat groups, or there's different websites where you can say what you're going through, and people who are not even therapists, just like peers, will comment. And these have been studied a little bit, not so much. Is this therapy? Is it not? People are benefiting. Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, was developed by someone who was not even a clinician. And he created this process that now is a standard of treatment. It never had to get approved by a psychiatrist or by go through it. It kind of came out organically. I think there's probably this whole new area of chatbots and how they're going to be used. Probably before it even becomes official mental health, they're going to be coaches. There's going to be sort of chatbots where you just talk about whatever's going on in your mind. And I think these will probably be the places where it can grow from. And I think there'll be a lot of people who are actually much more comfortable speaking to a computer than speaking to another human. Because it's intimidating to speak to another human. You're feeling judged. People who want to tell their most inner secrets may be more comfortable doing that when they know it's a chatbot. So I think sometimes we have, one of the assumptions that I hear is, we should not deceive the patient. We shouldn't make them think that, don't let them forget that there's actually a machine in the room. I would turn it around and tell them, no, you're speaking just to a machine. There's nothing else there. Okay, so keep that in mind. It may hallucinate, it may tell things that you don't agree with, and see how that goes. And I think a lot of people may actually gravitate to that in ways that we don't expect.
Chatbot is not judgmental from the patient side of view. And if I'm talking to a chatbot, it will not think bad things about me, even if I tell him horrible things that I want to do or some hideous things. So maybe from the patient side of view, it's better to talk to a chatbot, and he can talk more openly to it. And like you said, if I'm an LGBT, I will be more likely to say it to a chatbot than to a therapist.
But is that also good for society?
I think yes.
That's interesting. One question?
From society perspective, many of the mental diseases are without technology, especially the Alzheimer's said, like ADHD and some autism spectrum. And now you kind of suggest to solve parts of the technology that mental disease that will cause the technology by technology, and then it becomes a vicious circle that in the end people will lose, especially children, and you see it very greatly in Japan actually, when people lose their social skills, and this is a big danger actually. So we need all of us, from the AI mental community, we need actually to ensure that we minimize the AI tools. Otherwise, in a vicious circle process, it will harm, I think it will harm society, it will harm our natural behavioral capabilities.
I just want to repeat the comment for the people in Zoom. So Gary here said that one topic that we did not discuss is the dangers that AI and LLM, generative AI specific, are for mental health. if we take our patients and try to heal them with things that might cause their condition, is that not a vicious circle that we are not letting people actually develop their human and social skills?
I believe that intuitively you wouldn't treat things that are like based on social by an AI or just by an AI. You can use AI to enable therapy for someone that, for example, has social anxiety. But yeah, I think that, like, at least from my perspective, healing social anxiety by AI can be one part of a big process, not the whole process of it. It cannot stand on by itself, especially when talking about things that have a social nature to them. And things that are more neurological, it's another, like you mentioned, the ADHD, autism. I don't think that they have that much connection to use of technology and human connection as much as a neurological thing, and that is like another deviation of it. But also in those cases, making therapy more accessible to those people, and then by having some basics of AI, and then from there getting to a human, that would be like, I think, the ideal.
Yes, maybe you can relate to prevention in this area. How AI can play a role in this.
So the question was about AI's role in preventing mental health problems.
I think this is a good example, and that could even be one of the early use cases, right? Because prevention means that you're dealing with a population that's not yet clinical, but not yet depressed, but not yet in a disorder. So even from a regulatory perspective and an ethical perspective, there's maybe not as much of a risk of making bad mistakes because they're not yet that sick. But if you can identify signs that they may be tending towards depression or anxiety, and if you can potentially offer interventions that can, prevent them from going further into that road, then I think that'll be a perfect use case.
Yeah.
And this could even be, powering not just therapists, but family doctors and other professionals who don't have a therapy background, but who are seeing these patients all the time. And if they can kind of get an indication, look, your patient's saying this and this, maybe they are stressed, maybe they have certain issues, and try to intervene early, it could be an interesting idea.
I just add that in general, we know that AI can help in prevention by monitoring. It's not in talk therapy, but we talk about like in social media and other places that, and there are research about it, and even startups deal with it, like to identify the words that people, the way they express themselves, and to monitor them. And we know that there are organization in Israel that give like first aid to phone or whatever, that they did a lot of research to monitor, and then you have like and you know which people are really at risk, and you can contact them. So in like monitoring wards or donation even, things like that.
Before we conclude, we did not talk about October 7th in this panel. We are going to, I hope, have another meetup in this series to talk more about the war and how it affects mental health and the technological solutions that was raised in this aspect. And I would like, before we conclude, I'm going to ask for each of you summarizing work. Before that, if anyone here in the audience or in Zoom would like to offer some talk or some further discussion, a webinar, a meetup, this is very sadly a very important hot topic at the moment, and we can all gain from learning. Just like you said, it's not just the therapists, it's all of us talking this mental health language and addressing these issues. So please contact me or Mila or Rachel or anyone of the Yenet, anyone of the med admins, and we can make that happen. So, summary words.
You want to start?
I don't know, I think for me, this is a really exciting moment in history. This technology is extremely fascinating. We don't know exactly where it's going yet. So I think these discussions are great because just imagining different possibilities, imagining different angles, how it can be used, this is what we need to be doing right now, just to think about how we can use this new tool.
I think a good summary is to say that sometimes the psychological issues with the therapist and not just the patient, and maybe it's continuation of what you said, because we're like, this is what you think, and this was the first reaction, and this is what you usually hear here in Israel, but not all of them. It's not the first time that I hear, and I think there is a lot what you said, it is so true, but it's a process, because it's great, it's there already, but it's a process also for us to be judgmental, and I think it's important to be judgmental about it and to be cautious about it. It's also important. But I think it's something that you cannot ignore. It's there.
Just to add to both comments, I think we need to involve more patients and public involvement and engagement in the process of both developing and implementing tools. As we discussed, we are developing tools not to leave it, so we develop tools for people, both for clinicians and for clients, for patients who suffer. So we need to involve them, like as you mentioned. So we need to understand what they want. We don't just develop tools. We want to make sure that they will be accepted, trusted, by users, both clinicians and patients. So we need to make sure we involve people in co-production if possible. It might be a great idea for startup companies or for clinical research, and to involve more advertisers, to invite people. So I personally learned a great deal of inviting patients and people with lived experience, how they perceive the tools. And the feedback we received was really it really helped us to change our thinking and how we need to adapt our tools. So more power to people.
Now I need to say something different from the last one. But first of all, I want to say that I can really agree with you. Couldn't agree more. My role is being the clinician inside a startup that is developing something for clinicians. So couldn't agree more that we need to involve clinicians and patients and the end users of the technology in the steps of development, in the early steps of development. And also I believe that conversations like the one that we had here are so important, not only in the realms of like in front of developers or in front of people from the field, but also like in front of people that consume and therapy. I think that people hearing and listening about these debates, these conversations, all the different ways of looking at AI and its involvement in the medical fields, in the mental health fields, are very important in shaping the way that people see these tools and see therapy and see the tools that can be used within therapy and how they can empower themselves or their clinics or their their systems where they work with. So it's a really great discussion.
I will have to agree. And I hope you all agree. Thank you so much, and looking forward to what the future will bring.